Merry Meet, and welcome once again to the Heart of the Witch's Path podcast. I am your co-host, Helen.
And I'm Kathy, and Nala is here with us, so if you hear a cat or something falling, it's because she's helping.
Right. So we're coming to you today with episode 107. In our last podcast, Kathy and I shared that we are studying together because we do things together. Rama-lama-lama, ding-ding-ding-ding-dong. We have decided to study the runes together. Kathy's had some experience with runes and used them for a number of years, and I decided that this year I would turn my attention to runes as a divination tool and learn more about them. So that's kind of what brought us to this apex of whatever.
Right, and we had a class at Convocation where it was very, very thought-provoking and interesting, and I was able to pick up the book that we're going off of at Convocation, and Helen also picks up a copy of the book, so we've decided to follow the suggestions. This is Diana L. Paxson's book, Taking Up the Runes.
A complete guide to using runes in spells, ritual, divination, and magic.
And basically what this book is it's a layout for creating a group that will study the runes and learn about them. And so we've decided to follow her outline on this.
Right. So to get started, in the introduction, Diana talks a lot about the origins of the runes. Where did they come from? So to start off this podcast, I would like to read an excerpt of the Havamal. I believe I'm saying that correctly. We shall see.
Yes, there'll be a lot of mispronunciations because, well,
we're not learning. Okay? We're just learning, so bear with us. So, the section goes like this. I know I was hanged on the windy tree for 9 full nights, stabbed by a spear, offered to Odin, sworn by myself to myself, upon that tree that no man knows from what roots it rises. No bread did they bear to me, nor horn handed. Into the deep I gazed. I took up the runes, took them up, screaming, then fell back again.
Again, that's from the Havamal, from 138 to 39. I'm not sure if they call them stanzas or...
It's probably stanzas.
Yeah.
So
the myth behind the runes is that Odin hung himself on a tree for 9 days.
On Yggdrasil.
The world tree. Mm-hmm. And when he finally came down, he brought back these runes with him.
Well, on the tree, it's important to say that he died.
Right.
He sacrificed himself to himself because he is considered a god of the dead in some aspects. It's not his total aspect, but he is a guide of some sort, is my understanding.
Right.
So he sacrificed himself to himself by hanging himself on Yggdrasil, and he traveled there to a place that held a primordial pool, I believe is what it is, and that is where he saw and gained the knowledge of the runes.
Right.
So that when they say that the myth behind the runes is one of sacrifice, that's what Diana Paxson says in her introduction.
And historically, it's known that the first runic inscriptions date from the 2nd century CE. Nala, you are going to be in trouble.
She really needs to not buy that thumb drive.
Okay, there we go. But it's believed that the runes were used earlier and carved on wood, but of course wood rots. and so much of that was lost. I'm not sure if it was from this book or the class we had, or I've also been reading Futhark, A Handbook of Rune Magic by Edred Thorson. And so I'm not sure where I pulled this from, but there's a theory saying that the runes were a spoken method of magic and teaching that was used prior to the written form, because the runes resemble a lot of the alphabets that came up from the Mediterranean in that more southern era. It's believed that they just, oh hey, this sounds like that, so let's use this symbol as a way of writing those runes down.
Right. And so one theory, tells us that there's an Etruscan inspiration for the runes, which, if that's the case, then that puts their date even earlier than the 2nd century Common Era. And they say that there's an inspiration because of there's Etruscan words that we have a Latin translation for. So the Etruscan word for gods apparently is Aesar, which is spelled Aisar, and it sounds a great deal like the Aesir, which is the name of the gods in the Northern tradition pantheon. Now, that is as I understand it, as early on in this study as we are. I mean, I'm reading and trying to learn different things as we go along here. So if I've got something wrong, I invite someone to please correct me.
Oh, right. And we are learning. Yes, I have done a lot of things with the runes, but I haven't actually done a lot of reading on it. So this is both Helen and my opportunity to do the reading.
Right.
So the runic system that we're using is the Elder Futhark, Futhark is a word formed from the first of the six of the runes, Futhark.
Right.
There are other runic systems with more and or less than the, 24? 24 runes that we're using, but...
And isn't this the Elder Futhark?
It's the Elder Futhark,
because
yes.
there's a younger Futhark.
And then there's also an Anglo-Saxon Futhark.
Right.
But we are using the Elder Futhark.
I found it especially interesting that runes were inscribed, things that have survived. You talked about stuff that was in wood that obviously didn't survive because wood tends to rot and things like that. But runes were inscribed on spearheads and on boss or shield bosses, and combs and brooches, and later memorial stones. So I find it, that to be an anthropologist or an archaeologist that found those initially, I think that would be incredibly exciting.
The book by Edred Thorson talks about using the runes as house marks, and those survived in a much simpler form to the present day, but they were used. And also that the Norse people used the runes in the crafting of their houses. And even after the knowledge of that magic was lost, the houses were still crafted with the beams in such a place as to be the magical runes, even if the people making them didn't understand why they were making them that way.
Mm-hmm. It's my understanding that a lot of the lore in the Northern traditions, and I guess we should probably state that Northern traditions is what I'm finding, and correct me if you think differently, but I'm hearing that a lot lately in place of like the Norse pantheon. Like I'm hearing Northern traditions.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Raven Caldera, I believe I've heard heathen in reference to him, and I've heard a Northern shaman, Northern tradition shaman. But he definitely is heavily influenced by what others might call the Norse pantheon.
Right.
So I think it's all kind of one and the same. It's that whole Viking Thor, Freya,
Right.
Odin, Hel, and gods of that pantheon that we're kind of talking about here.
And I guess that we should state that while we do sometimes work with Norse gods and goddesses, neither one of us follow a northern tradition.
Correct. We're eclectic. I mean,
Right.
we take stuff that speaks to us. So what I was starting to say was a lot of this northern tradition, it started off in almost like a ballad, poetic form.
Right.
So it was very much sung, and it was an oral tradition, like so much of, the Celtic and things like that. It was a very oral tradition. And Diana Paxson cites that by the time it was ever thought that they're called sagas, by the time that it was thought that they should be written down, it was written in the Latin alphabet because that was the major form of written communication. So when these were first written down, they weren't even written in runic form. So by that point, runes were relegated to a magical purpose only, even though it was still, basically the spoken word of the northern tradition people was this language. So I found that interesting. And I guess the only other thing that we really want to share at this point, right, about the historical origins and all that kind of stuff is in reference to Odin. Because Odin is the one that brought the runes to the people. He is known not only as a psychopomp, am I saying that right? Which is a guide and god of the dead. But he's also one of the greatest magicians in the northern tradition. And I believe he's classified as a wanderer. He's classified as, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, he has a triple aspect. And it was wanderer, it was shaman, and wise one or something like that.
That sounds right.
Yeah. I'm gathering knowledge on Odin because he has agreed to work with me on the runes.
On the other hand, he won't work with me because I have a kitty. Not the kitty that's holding on to me, but my totem animal is a cat, and apparently Odin doesn't care for that.
So
that's okay, because Thor will work with me.
So chapter 1 of this book, Diana sets up in a really great way. She sets up how to go about running a group like this that is going to study the runes together.
Yeah, the book is organized into 2 sections. The first is actual study of the runes themselves, and the second section is rituals to do to gain more insight on the runes, and there's meditations that go with them as well. But the first chapter in the book talks about how to go about setting up an organization. I think she suggests doing 2 runes a month.
Right. The subsequent chapters in the first section of the book cover 2 runes per chapter.
Right.
And then so there's rituals, meditations, and things like that go with that chapter to help you gain knowledge of those runes. Which I think it's broken down so far. I mean,
it seems to be pretty well.
Yeah.
I mean, so far I've read through that first. Well, it's chapter 3, so it's the first. No. Chapter 2. I've read through the first rune set, which is Fehu and Uruz. But that's not what we're talking about today, because Helen hasn't read that far. And I actually haven't done the working that she has suggested. But we'll get to that next time we talk about these.
So she talks about writing down, what is your understanding of the runes at the beginning. Coming into this study session, what do you know, and what do you want to know? What are your goals? So I think that's kind of, and I think that if you're doing any kind of journaling, that you can definitely do that in your journal.
Right.
So she also has a section of resources, and I'm looking to see, there's a Gods and Myths of Northern Europe by Ellis Davidson's. And then there's
the Elder and Younger Eddas, which is poetic verses. She actually has a lot of, even in the introduction, she has a lot of references to other books that you could read, and the one by Edred Thorson is listed. It's the only other one that I have that she listed, but she does a good job of referencing other people and suggesting what else you can be reading.
So she talks about like how to organize yourselves, like she says set up your meetings and study times, when, where, how many times a month, and who's going to lead the group, or who's going to be responsible for it, and stuff. Are you
going to do the rituals that are involved?
Right.
Something else that she talks about that I found interesting was dress, because she encourages you to dress in some way in a Norse mode to shift your consciousness, which is something we don't normally do.
But I did today.
You did?
Intentionally.
Yeah, not me. I did not.
Well, I don't have any specific Norse-esque clothing or anything like that, but I wore a broom skirt and tried to put myself in that, thought process and stuff like that. So, yeah, I found that interesting. But she didn't say that you had to go out and get, a traditional looking outfit. I mean, you certainly could if you wanted to, but you can suffice by, a piece of jewelry or a t-shirt or something like that. So, something, we talk about, wearing ritual garb for ritual because it helps put you in the mindset, and this is the same thing. Right. It's helping you in that mindset. And some people need it more than others. So
this is true.
So I appreciated that.
Right. So, and she talks about, as you're setting up these meetings that you're going to have, she suggests having a potluck out to eat after the ritual, so that you can further discuss your experiences in ritual and with the runes. The stuff we haven't had a chance to do yet is the between the meetings. She suggests doing a number of things to help you work with the runes that you've read about. One of them is to do a rune altar, so that you can either pull some runes, the runes that you're going to be working on, or write them down on a piece of paper. Light a candle, do a picture. There's a number of things that you could put on your altar to focus on those two runes.
Yeah, because each of the names of the runes, we talked about the fact that the second chapter deals with Fehu and Uruz. And these words are actual words. They're words used by the Nordic people. And, we'll get into that with each, chapter, but Fehu means cattle. And so she suggests putting a picture of a cow or a representation of a cow or something like that on this, little altar. It doesn't have to be a huge altar. It's just something small. And Uruz is, how do you say that word?
Uruz? Yeah.
No, what they are.
The aurochs?
Aurochs are a type of cattle that has since they're extinct.
Right.
They're extinct.
Right.
But you can find a picture of that specific breed or whatever.
Drawing.
And
right, since they are extinct.
Right. And do your altar with that. So I definitely want to set up something like that just to help. And I think I want to draw the runes for that particular lesson and put it there. Even if it's something like a index card or an index card. Right. Something small. It doesn't have to be some painting or anything like that.
Just something to focus your mind.
Right.
And while you're focusing your mind, meditation is an awesome idea. Just to focus on that rune, each one, or both together, because they can be used together. And take some time to meditate and see what you can find in the depth of your mind and your consciousness, and make sure that you write everything down.
Right. Oh, definitely. Write everything down from your experiences. I like when she talks about the inscribing.
Yeah, I actually did that a few times last week with the Uruz rune, and I found it very interesting the way that my body reacted to having that inscribed on me.
I haven't tried it yet, but I want to. I've been so busy working on my last lesson for Witchcraft 3 that I just started, heavy duty reading last night, so I haven't had a chance to do any of these practical stuff.
So she talks about envisioning it, again, staring at the card.
For the envisioning, she says to take like a larger piece of paper and draw the rune on it, and then so you stare at it, and then you take a clean piece of paper and you put in front of it, and this envisioning, it's a visualization exercise, really, because you work with it enough so that you see the rune on the blank page, and then she talks about changing colors, and isn't that section? Yeah, she talks about seeing it as a doorway that you can go through and stuff like that, a doorway to that rune. So I'm kind of geeked to try that.
Right, and I think that will tie into meditation as well.
Right. I'm so excited about intoning. I've been trying to work up to it.
I actually, not out loud, but I have been doing it in my mind as I go to sleep at night. And again, the feeling that you get with that is just amazing.
Yeah, I want to do that. There's actually, in the ritual section, there's an entire, there's like music too. There's a section of singing the runes, which I'm kind of excited to try. So yeah.
We'll see how that goes. And she talks about ingesting the runes, drawing it on the food that you're eating to take that into your body. You can drink it or eat it. Either way, you're bringing that intention and that power, magical power of the rune into your body.
Now, of course, there's tons of places out there where you can buy your own rune sets.
Right.
And that's cool.
Because I bought a lot of rune sets.
I feel kind of blessed because my rune set was actually made for me by Kathy. So I thought about buying another set, but I think I would rather just kind of stick with what I have right now, which mine is made from polymer clay, which I love, and the colors are awesome.
And traditionally they're made of wood, but I don't have any great skill in cutting wood or wood burning, and so I just used polymer clay and laid it out and, cut out the rune shapes. I used a little cutter, like a cookie cutter, only smaller, and by hand inscribed the runes on them, and it seemed to work really well. I've made several sets of those and given them as gifts. I've also drawn the runes on like stones that have been worn down by water and are like flat. I took them from Lake Michigan, and I drew on those the runes, and I gave them as a gift to our Dianic teacher.
Oh, I wondered. I don't even remember you doing that.
Well, I didn't do it for you. I did it for our Dianic teacher.
But I mean, runes can be made from lots of things. In the book, Diana talks about the fact that they can be made from wood or stone. They can be made from metal. They can be made from bone, antler. She lists, sacred trees like the oak and the ash and beech, rowan, that you can make them out of. And she also gives the suggestion that if you cut wood for magical purposes, it should be done on a waxing moon. I thought that was an interesting thing. And that kind of reminds me of the class that we took. The guy that was teaching the class at Convocation, he talked about the fact that he had multiple sets. And he'd even had even more sets in his life that he had gifted or whatever. But he said that he used different sets of runes for different purposes.
Right.
Because he'd had wooden ones that he, I don't remember any of the specifics, but it was like...
he had metal that was made from a fence, graveyard fence.
Right. And he was talking about, like, one kind of wood was good for love divination, and stuff like that, and he had clay runes as well. So that's kind of interesting, and maybe at one point I will have different sets.
I picked up a set that were carved on Tiger's Eye, and Bast is my patron goddess, and Tiger's Eye is sacred to her, so I felt that Tiger's Eye would work well with me, and they have so far. I haven't had them long.
Right. So then the last thing that Diana talks about not the last thing, but one of the last things that she talked about in that first chapter is consecrating your runes and how to do so. And I mean, if you're involved in the craft, you probably know how to consecrate things. I'm trying to remember, was there anything specific out of here? She talks a lot about red being connected with runes.
Because there's a theory that they used blood to consecrate their runes, to kind of feed the runes.
Mm-hmm. Or your saliva. I know that, I pull a rune every day. Mm-hmm. For, looking for, a message or things to think about for the day or whatever. And every time I pull one, I give a gift to the runes, and that's something that I established with Odin when he agreed to work with me. So I do that every time. So
and the last thing that she talks about in that chapter is the group ritual, which, again, in the second section of the book, she has group rituals, and there is one for beginning this group. And Helen and I have not done it yet. However, we plan to do that kind of next here.
not
on the podcast, but we plan on doing that after we get done here. And the ritual is kind of long and involved. There's some singing and some invoking, and then there's a relatively long meditation that's involved, which should be interesting. And then, of course, celebrating and grounding, which is done through this group work and the potluck and feasting.
Woo woo.
Yay yay.
So that's kind of our beginnings into this. I'm excited to learn more about the runes.
Right. And we plan on recording our discussions on each of the rune sets. They may or may not make it into podcasts. We've been doing really, really good at recording a podcast every other week, but sometimes life happens. So the intention is that if we can't get together and record a podcast, that Helen can throw one of these discussions into podcast space. So if you, in the middle of, 5 podcasts about other things, happen to run across a runic discussion podcast, that's why.
Mm-hmm. So we'll definitely, I'll list again this book and link where you can buy it, and the Futhark book by Edred Thorson. I'll list those in the description box. And if you're interested in learning more about the northern tradition, we happened upon this guy, Thunder Wizard, has podcasts that you can find. His website is thunderwizard.com, and I believe you can find his podcasts there.
They're on iTunes as well.
They're on iTunes if you use iTunes, and if you're an Android user, there is an app called Podcast Addict, and you can do a search for Thunder Wizard, and that will come up. And he not only talks about the runes, which I think are really interesting because he seems to be very smart. He seems to be very learned in the subject, not only of runes, but of the sagas, the pantheons, the Teutonic people, which the Teutonic people were the earlier Germanic people of the area that later kind of, the Norse of the Scandinavian peninsula kind of took their belief system from the Teutons. So he's very well educated in that area, and talks about Thor and talks about Freya and different things like that. And
his podcasts about the runes are very interesting because I believe he has a point when he says that you can't look at the runes from our perspective because they weren't developed in our era. They were developed in a completely different time period. So while they who might mean money to us, it was cattle to them because cattle gave them everything that they needed to survive.
Right. So it's a different take.
Yeah.
I think it's a more historical take.
Yeah, and a lot of what he says really makes sense. Now, he does tend to ramble on a little bit, but
like in a good
everything
way.
that he says is very interesting.
And
it's fascinating.
He has a YouTube channel as well. So, and that's Thunder Wizard if you do a search on YouTube. And he does have a book out, and if you go to his website, I kind of want to get the book, and I think he might have more than one. I'm not entirely sure.
I just listened to the Rune podcast.
Right. So it's interesting. So another, thing to think about, another possible reference, if you're interested in learning more about runes as well. So we will leave it at that for today.
Right. We forgot our correspondence, but we talked about him.
Odin is our correspondence for the day. Odin Father is a pretty nifty guy. I like him.
As long as you don't have a kitty.
He has big wolves, and I like wolves, so we're getting along well. So I like that. So that's going to be it for today. Mm-hmm. We thank you for taking the time to walk along this path for a little while with us. And until next time, blessed be.
Blessed be.